John Steinbeck's The Pearl is a book heavy in symbolism. The book's protagonist is a pearl diver named Kino. In a book that relies centrally on symbolism, it makes sense to ask, what does Kino symbolize? First, it's interesting to note that Steinbeck initially wrote The Pearl as a film treatment, but maybe the fact that the story was originally intended to be a film can give us a way to understand one of the most curious things about Kino, his nearly complete lack of internal dialogue. When Kino's inner life is described in the novella, there are no thoughts, only feelings, songs, and images. Here are a couple of quotes from the first pages of the book. First, after Kino wakes up, quote, "Kino hears the little splash of morning waves on the beach. It was good." End quote. Quote, "In Kino's head there was a song now, clear and soft, and if he had been able to speak of it, he would have called it the song of the family." End quote. These details present Kino as a very simple person, a borderline offensively simple depiction of a native pearl diver living on the Sea of Cortez. Later, after Kino finds the pearl of the world, his inner state is described again, and it features images instead of ideas. Instead of thinking in language here, he thinks in pictures. Quote, "And in the incandescence of the pearl, the pictures formed of the things Kino's mind had considered in the past and had given up as impossible. In the pearl he saw Juana and Coyotito and himself standing and kneeling at the altar, and they were being married now that they could pay." And you see in that quote the phrase, "the things Kino's mind had considered," and even there we get a sense that Kino is just relating passively to the thoughts that pass through his mind, or to the non-thoughts that pass through his mind, the pictures, the images, the songs, the emotions. And these things are true of Kino throughout the novel. His internal life is devoid of anything that looks truly like thought. Yet Kino is more or less a normal person. He is able to articulate himself clearly when he speaks. He doesn't talk much, but he expresses his will when he does. In fact, almost all of his dialogue in the book takes the form of a statement of purpose or desire. There's no conversation about ideas, there's no philosophy, no deep reflection, or even shallow reflection. He only speaks of plans that take the form of simple declarations. There is one exception to this in chapter 4 when he recalls the priest's sermon on guarding the ramparts of the universe by refusing to be tempted to try to change society's status quo. Kino remembers the speech and, interestingly, offers no comment on whether he agrees with the priest's idea or not. Does he truly believe that people should accept their social station, that if you're born into poverty, you shouldn't try to escape that poverty? He doesn't say. But it is important to note that he recalls that sermon while he's walking into town to sell his pearl of the world in the hopes that he can send his son to school and escape poverty and change the status quo, get his son some education so that they can move out of their station in life. So clearly Kino has ambition, and he has a certain integrity too. He's not exactly thoughtless because he can speak his mind in the form of declarations and the like. But Steinbeck gives him essentially zero thoughts when Kino's internal life is presented in the novella. Right? We get songs and emotions, pictures. After establishing Kino as a thoughtless but otherwise normal person, Steinbeck takes a new step in his characterization. In chapter 5, Juana and Kino have an altercation. Kino knocks his wife down and, quote, "looked down at her, and his teeth were bared. He hissed at her like a snake." End quote. The animalism here ascribed to Kino seems to amplify Steinbeck's description of Kino as a cipher, a person without depth. To some extent, Kino is an example of a person as a product of his environment, He is responding to the world around him. He has desires that are reactions to circumstance. He wants to get married because he was poor. He wants a rifle because his world is violent. He is not generating ideas of his own. He is simply reacting. And in this way, he's like an animal. And this reading of Kino makes him a lot like the Lenny character in Of Mice and Men. If you're familiar with Of Mice and Men, then you might recognize that, like Kino, Lenny is introduced to the story in association with water in a natural setting. And like Kino, Lenny is described in animalistic terms. Lenny is like a bear, Kino like a snake. And like Kino, Lenny also allows himself to believe in an idealistic and unrealistic dream. But what does this mean? What does the connection between these two characters really mean? We don't want to stretch the connection too far, but we can say that both Lenny and Kino are aligned with nature, or with a certain mode of being that's natural because it's pure, uncomplicated, and true. They're both people reacting to the world around them, not shaping that world or taking power over it. To simplify, it seems that these are figures of innocence in a world that punishes innocence. Lambs living among lions. Kino is obviously intended to be more of an average or everyman than Lenny in Of Mice and Men, because Kino is capable of defending himself. He's capable of taking action on his own. He's not the lamb that most lions would want to mess with, but then again, he does fail to heed wise advice and fails to accomplish his biggest goals. But Kino's failures may be, in the end, the message of his character. And it leads to some interesting questions. Why does he fail? Does he fail because he's too innocent of the world, unable to outwit the people who try to exploit him? Or does he fail because he betrays the values that he began with? If he begins in a state of purity and innocence, like Lenny, in a state that is highlighted for Kino by his lack of thoughtful internal monologue, does Kino in the end come to grief because he's lost that innocence? And what does it mean in the end for Kino to be simple? Again, going back to the initial question, what does Kino symbolize? What does he represent in a book that is heavy with symbolism? What does Kino symbolize? One way to read Kino's simplicity and to explain why he has so little internal thought is to say that Steinbeck wanted to give us this character as a stand-in for mankind. He is a natural person. He is maybe man in his natural state. He's a person at the beginning who is not corrupted by materialism. He does possess the things that he wants and needs. He doesn't worry about getting the church wedding until he gets the pearl. It's only after he attains something that seems to open the doors to material wealth that he starts craving more than he has. It's only after he finds the pearl that his world becomes violent. Kino, maybe, is corruptible just like any other man, but he begins in a state of purity and innocence that is not corrupt, that is simple, that is a state of being characterized by harmony, which is represented in the music that exists inside him.